When we look at all this, I think we were partly responsible for some of the confusion of having rankings out there, and people keep saying, this ranking says this and that ranking says that, and they're not comparable, which is true. One of the most important parts was also true because you compared a study from 6 months ago to a study 12 months ago to a study from today, because we have these, data that is moving, especially for 5G. And that is, we talked about that. And Curdy gave a great analogy. You have this, this bucket, a leaking bucket of where some patents expire and they go out and new filings come in. And, some of your patents you sell and some you acquire. So the portfolio, that bucket is always changing. So if you compare this and do rankings, obviously, different points of time, these rankings always change, right? And, it doesn't bring you closer to the reality or to the truth. Same as the standard has new versions. Patent that was today not essential, maybe essential tomorrow, because the next release includes a section that now reads on your claim. So that happens, right? So your patent may become essential even in the future, even though it's granted and the claim doesn't change, the standard may change. So that also, of course, changes the numerator and denominator and all the counting and ranking, and it's always a dynamic thing. So if you want to compare something, you're always going to be having different numbers. And and you have to be very precise, and many people don't do that. You have to include certain subsidiaries, parent companies. You have to look at current assigneship, all the things that we do. So it's a lot of data work to do it very precisely, and many don't do it, taking care of different releases and versions and all that, getting really what is 5G, which TS are we 5G, and it's not all, precisely cleared also. So there's so many data decisions that you ultimately always end up with different rankings. It's just the nature of the data. And still, even if you do it perfectly, I think we are getting closer to do it very good. It's still misleading, and I really agree with that. And why is that? First of all, again, the data issue. Patent declarations are far from perfect. There's even false negative declarations of patents that are pharmaceutical or biotech patents, right? You so have to clean that up. Also, what ETSI is, the ETSI IPR policy says you have to declare one basis patent. You don't have to declare the family members. And then ETSI claims, we connected to work with this fastnet to get the family members. Well, why did you then miss 56,000 patents, US EPCN or Korean Japanese granted patents are not in the ETSI database that should be in? So that API is not working. For whatever reason, it's not working. So if you just download the ETSI report, you're missing at least a lot of granted patents that you should take into account. So this is just giving you some insights of why it's really, really difficult to do that. And then people obviously sometimes do, double counting because you have to count by family. Your patent is up to 15 times declared to different versions of the standard. It's always the same patent. All that is not an easy job, right? So this is easy to do. But even again, if you do all that perfectly, you basically counted declarations, and we all know many of these are non-essential. And actually what we found out, or at least to our estimation, is that the rate of over-declaration has been constantly increasing, right? At least if you look at some of the, SEP determination reports for generations like 3G and 4G, the essentiality rate was much higher compared to the essentiality rate we have today. Our estimation is that only 10 to 15% from the declared patents of EP and US granted patents is essential, right? Even if you look at only the granted patents, only a low number is still essential. I know there's even reports out there that even have a lower number. We discussed that with Matthias from Ericsson. So to an economist, what does it tell you? The lower the number of really essential patents in a database, the higher is the likelihood that if you look at a portfolio, there are differences in essentiality rates, right? And that, of course, makes it really difficult to look at rankings. This is just a matter of logic, because why would it be evenly distributed, this essentiality rate? If it were, we wouldn't have an issue of count. Of course, we wouldn't, right? Then everything is the same, and then we just count declarations. So in a perfect world, we would maybe claim chart every patent, and we have a neutral expert and a double-blind process, and we do that, but it's not economically feasible, right? it's just too costly. We did a little survey for the European Commission on how much it would cost to claim chart rigorously, and it's very expensive. Just for 200 patents, $500,000. But we have 50,000 active families right now for 5G, so no one can and wants to do that, right? What we do at IPlytics, and I hope it's often not misunderstood, we're trying to get closer to the truth of what is essential and what's not. But we don't want to do that to be the source or the holy grail of what's essential and what's not. We just want to help getting closer to the truth, and we don't want to make any decisions. And we do find correlations of certain characteristics of a patent that show you that a patent is more likely or less likely essential. Again, you can trick the system. I know all that. You send a lot of people to meetings. This is, nothing we're not, arguing against it. Still, as to the rule of large numbers, you can look at indicators to get a better feeling of the portfolio and what's essential and what's not. And we came up with these 7 characteristics. Some have more explanatory power, some have less, right? But they work and they help you. The semantic comparison of claims and sections. It will always overvaluate a patent attorney that uses language closer to the standard, while the probably smarter, mine was talking about the art of claim drafting. A patent attorney that uses very abstract words may have a much more essential patent, which a semantic algorithm will not pick up, right? So you may have this patent attorney that uses language closer to the language of the standard. Systematically, that claim looks much more essential to our algorithm, right? That doesn't mean that this is not going to help you to claim chart, but it means it's not neutral in a way, right? So, and we actually find that, and I'll show you in a minute how it looks. And we do look at named inventors of patents if they go to meetings, and it also shows that it correlates that those patents that end up being essential have more of those named inventors that went to meetings. But of course, some firms have different strategy of doing that. They split teams or they never send inventors to meetings. Again, it's a firm-specific strategy. So for really evaluating portfolios, it's going to be difficult. But still, our clients love it because they can look at scoring portfolios and scoring simple patents, but not for frank determination. They do that for portfolio management. They do that for decision-making on their portfolios. They do that for finding gaps in their portfolios, monitoring competition, but they don't want to go to court with it, right? And that is, I think, the big difference of what we do and what is expected. I think one important thing we have to understand with all the data, we will always have an error rate. And for me, the error rate is how close are you to the truth? And to the rule of large numbers, sometimes on a single patent basis, it doesn't matter if you're sometimes wrong, if you're on average right? So that is valuable, that gives you information. What is an issue is a systematic bias, meaning the error rate is not zero-centric, as an economist would say. So if you compare two portfolios and you have a low error rate, but you're systematically overvaluating one portfolio to the other, it's useless, right? And that is the big issue, the systematic bias. And this is an interesting paper that Justice and me are writing right now. So what we compared in this paper is a rigorous claim charting of a sample of patents compared to charting all patents non-rigorously, 10 minutes per claim, compared to semantic analysis. This here is the sample. Rigorous claim charting gives you a lot of high error rates, right? A lot of times, from your sample to the, the assumption to the whole population, you have error rates. But that error is zero-centric. You're neutral. You're really fair, right, with the portfolio analysis. 10-minute analysis on every claim, lower error rates, but it's not neutral. You are actually overvaluing some portfolios to some others, and the semantic algorithm actually performs the same. It gets you very close to the truth often, but it overestimates certain portfolios to others because just claim language of certain patent attorneys to others, right? And that we have to be aware of. That these systematic errors, is why the ranking comparison are so difficult. So, to conclude, subject matter expert claim charting is too expensive. It's also not the truth either, because if you don't do it rigorously, you have the same error rate as you would do it with semantic analysis. pattern data approach is good to get an understanding. It's not useless, right? All these cross correlations get you closer to the truth, but it's not neutral often, unless you find a way or a method or a regression that can, rule out that systematic bias. We're, as a company, not going to do it. Some of the experts could, maybe if they can, but I don't, I will not going to do it. Maybe Justus finds a way. But we just give the data, and allow you to look at more information that is out there when you look at raw data. And I think what we should conclude with all these very technical discussions, that in the end, if you want to have deals that are closed, we have to come back to a more simpler system. And it actually goes back to what Justus is saying, an agreement, a norm where we can all understand this is a license, this may be even a lump sum, this is a price everyone can somehow agree on. And then we find these deals. And we can, in IoT, there will not be a litigation on valuation if you're talking about, some of these small, medium-sized companies. They will have to have a very simple license, like a pool or even like a per module license that they don't even care about if it's a SEP or the module, right? It must be so simple for these guys that all that what we want to do shouldn't matter, because otherwise it's not going to be successful. So if you want to use data, use this for patent management, use it for, some of the decision making, finding your gold nuggets if you want to. But for this valuation rankings, it has limits, and it's always going to end up having some bias in one way or another if you don't do it right. So that was the fast version. Question, Mike.
Yeah, I'll just try to say it loud so you don't do it. How do you address the situation where, like Caltech, where you have a patent that is deemed essential but it's not subject to print? I work in a lot of patents that wind up being in that situation. And I heard a lot of content today about how folks think about that stuff, whether it's in terms of royalty rate or in terms of discovery. I'll just be interested in your perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a client actually just recently joined or subscribed. Is doing exactly that. They using our contribution data, using our standards data, and they follow standardization, and they try to draft claims that are both essential and valid. And they're not part of CDP. They never signed FRAN, and that's their business model, right? We are trying to get more data in our software that is not just declared, kind of like assuming this is a patent that could be relevant, because of certain characteristics of that patent, especially for Wi-Fi and video coding, where the data is really not existing. But yeah, there's ways to address that. If they will end up still getting but I don't know if they will be subject to some other legal framework just because they never signed a FRAN contract. I don't know. That's a legal question. But these companies and business models exist. I think they got even more. Yet on a small scale, they don't have huge portfolios, but they do. Sure.
Follow-up question. So, how can I address the foundational integrations? Maybe the issue years ahead of standardization, because as you know, once an idea goes through the standardization process, the terminology change drastically, right? So you won't find any resemblance when you look at I don't know, if you do the keyword search or even the context of some of these inventions from the early days to the time that is adopted by the standard. Of course, if you have, you are a latecomer to the standard and you have attorneys that can massage the claim, as you pointed out, you would be able to have, a claim that reads very well in the standard. But how would you deal with this situation of these early innovations?
Again, I think it's what we typically say is we are just providing a software, a tool that allows you to take care of that. Most of the contributions, as you pointed out earlier, are change requests on very incremental things, right? The initial work item that has the fundamentals of the idea is in the data, it's different character in the data. If you do pure counting, you're mostly counting change requests on an initial idea that is very valuable, right? You can separate that in the database. If you say it's 10 times more, valuable. I leave that to you because you're the technical expert. I wouldn't want to judge that, right? But if, you know, we're trying to get as close to allowing you to differentiate these initial ideas compared to incremental ideas. Not always going to be possible, but there are ways to getting closer to the truth. Eva.
Thanks, Tim. Interesting. I'm always fascinated when the data comes into play and when the economists and the data scientists start talking about SEPs, because to me, it's a foreign world because it's actually quite far from the practice and quite far from what's happening in the licensing negotiation table. So maybe more than a question, just a comment. In my experience, every negotiation is aiming at actually getting to something that licensees like to call patent peace. So usually nobody wants their license agreement to say that the scope of license is the actually essential patents. So I'm always very fascinated as to why do we go to such great extent to try and understand the value of actually essential patents, and why do we then want to focus our regulation on that? And let me just sort of reflect on what I think, at least in ETSI and 3GPP friend, meant in the very beginning and how the SSOs looked at it. I think they specifically intended that to be resolved in bilateral negotiations. Bilateral negotiations. So I just want to, take a step back again and look at the big picture. We've come a long way. And I think we all have great intentions, good intentions. And this is a really important technology, valuable technology asset. And we all need to be very cautious about how we deal with it in order to continue the virtuous cycle of innovation and all the good things, benefits that it has brought to us.
I hope that came across, but that is really the fundamental of my talk today, is that we shouldn't over-engineer it. I mean, because you're ending up being not, impartial. So, data helps, but data is not the holy grail. Very aware that many licensing agreements beyond courts don't need data. Again, our customers typically don't use it for that. They use it for portfolio management, for gap analysis, kill or keep decisions, more the practical stuff that we deal with, in the end, it's more like this. It's a norm of licenses bilateral. I think in the future we will have much more different models because bilateral will not work anymore. But it's not to be over-engineered. And again, even no licensee would sign a contract that has a patent list in the appendix, because tomorrow you have an essential patent and I have to renegotiate the license because I have a missing one. So I think that is understood on both sides of the table, that we need something more flexible. Again.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks. Even though it was very fast, I thought it was a very good presentation. People get very nervous about this kind of data. I encounter all the time people being very nervous about this kind of data. Yours and other people's, but yours for sure. And I say, and I will say, and Kirti can back me up on here, I will say it is not presented in a false way. There's always the disclaimers that understand what the limits are, and the data is the data, and that it is what it is. And is it better than having nothing? Is it better than having no information? It is probably better than having no information. It's not the be all end all. But then people get nervous, I will just say, just because, we had the kind of valuation guys up there, right? And they have to do what valuation guys do in litigation, which is, find the things that they can point to that help support the work they're doing. I'll just put it exactly that way. And so people are nervous that then the data, I'll just say, will be misused or overinterpreted. And your talk was basically like, hey, we're on the same page, right? We're saying the same thing. And so my question is not, well, do you agree with that? Because I've known you for years and I know you do. And that's why you're so careful. You're way more careful than anyone else. My question to you is, how can we demystify it or de-risk it so that as an industry, we can have better conversations about, okay, how do we improve knowledge and views about this, and get people less afraid of having, potentially imperfect results, but still useful results?
I mean, I have to admit that we started off at IPlytics where we wouldn't care much about that nervousness. We would care about marketing and, being famous. And we learned from that. I mean, we matured on that because even though that many CEOs of the companies that are here read our reports, which I found fascinating until today, or The Economist cited us, or Wall Street Journal cited us, and we have that nice Statista logo that you got up on. It harmed, of course, a lot of things, also credibility. So we, of course, went back and tried to, use that fame now and evangelizing how to use it. I talk about that in my podcast with people like Curdy. I talk about that with many people on conferences. I think that is what we can do. We can educate, right? And I think, 90% of my job today is educating people, our clients, of why they should use it, but also the world of, what are the limits of data and, where you should not use it, just to keep that credibility. I think that is a lot of what I do and why we do all these events, right? To get people in the room, preferably from both sides of the table, and get some conclusion and agreement that we can do deals and not end up in litigation.
Thank you, Tim. I also really appreciated the presentation and the way you carefully said that and it's incredible that you built a successful company at just the right time for this. So congratulations. But I have some thoughts on what Fabian is describing as a very legitimate problem of use and abuse of data because of one dynamic that I was sharing earlier this morning of posturing. Posturing has become important, not just because of these licensing quibbles between companies, those things will continue, but for much larger and bigger geopolitical, reasons. And by the way, no one can deny that there's a, technology race going on. Just Google standards technology race. Do it now and see what you hit. You'll hit a lot. So how can we, manage, pushing the envelope like you're doing with the data, but making sure that it's not misused? I actually have a thought in that, and I would love to hear reactions. My thought has always been that, look, pure counts are definitely useless, right? It's that coin analogy. What you're doing is some kind of, more systematic weighting, which I view as a compass, which gives you a direction, but not magnitude. Right. And that's where we need to draw the distinction. I would love to hear thoughts.
I mean, one thing that is interesting in my industry, there are all these patent softwares out there, and they do a very simple job in just using total citations and patent family size. And people love it, and people use these tools forever. In our industry, everyone gets nervous, right? In all the other industries, they keep doing that for years. But it's different because we discuss multi-billion licenses that are based on that thing, right? So we're happy to be in that area. In my industry, in the software patent analytics space, what we do is so sophisticated that everyone is happy for doing what we offer. But I think what we should do is, getting the word out, explaining the limitations of that, doing less company rankings. So we did for our latest 5G report doesn't include any company name anymore because we don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want to be cited in every second litigation. I don't get even revenue for that. People are misusing our data. No, it's free. It's freebies, but it's more harmful now than it helps, right? So I don't want to get that out there anymore. So leave it to other companies. You know, we're kind of trying to get data information out there, but talking about the limits and, you know, but I mean, I'll be happy to open for anyone who has ideas to improve that even more. Another conference, a webinar, anything that helps, a lecture, you know, I'll be supportive of that.
You already have the couch. It doesn't get any better than that. It's a therapeutic couch session.
Very nice.
Everyone who wants to be on the couch, invited to be there. Come on, please.
Never used that tool. That tool is really, really fantastic because if you go on acting to pull out from dynamic recording, then the data is really, really messy. It took you months to clean them up and try to do the family extension stuff. But this tool will have you do it just in 1 second. So maybe 5 minutes. So this is what I like the tool because they already group the family together. And when I look at it's not only IPlytics, other consulting company also provide the data, and I compare with them. And I think the IPlytics data is the most accurate for putting out the family members and grouping into these ones. The other thing, I'm kind of, are you with me? I'm not. Another thing is they put all the contributions. Maybe you will say that because I was out. Put them in the text form, so it's searchable. If you want to perhaps search, if you go on Acting or 3DP, it's hard because you download all the spreadsheet, look at each month's contribution, try to figure out why they either download the contribution. For them, you can search by keywords, and it's searchable. So if you guys do perhaps search, you will know it will give you which contribution was related to whatever you are searching. So these are the two things I'm doing. But actually, I always had besides selling this your tool is having a question for you. Because you pointed out there are 20,000 patterns are missing from the database, right? Then you put it on that. I'm a little nervous because do you differentiate them in your tool? Can I tell which ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and not to misunderstood. I mean, Etsy does a great job in getting all the families together, but not the members. So if you think, you know, if you want to see how many patents are granted in the US of what's declared, and you only look at the basis declared Chinese patents, you won't find that. So I mean, and I'm not criticizing Etsy. I mean, this is not their job to be a perfect database. I mean, this is not, I mean, this is our business.
So when I think that people ever to long. Anyway, sorry. Anybody? So you do say which ones you put in.
We do, yeah. We call it originally and IPlytics expanded family. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you.
And I think then we have to go to the next step.
I was gonna actually throw the statement out there and then try to get around. Tying into your data analytics, there was a law student at USD with some economist students who I was talking to, and their question was after, and they have no contact with standards, no anything, it was very refreshing. They said, you have agreement that these standard essential patents are a very low percentage of what's needed or what's in the standard itself, that there are many other patents in there. There are optional parts or deal with the actual use of it in a commercial market. So why are you focusing so much on that small percentage? Or Fran, why don't you make them free and let the patent holders make their money off of the rest of them, which we already argue are not tethered to Fran, so they have a market value determination. I was just wondering if your data ever looks at trying to separate how many patents a company holds that are in the standard versus how many they hold that are actual SEPs. Because I believe the data of the 10, 12% you're talking about are all companies together declaring them, and then how many are actually valid, but just company by company. You know, that's just makes me wonder if we're looking at this from the wrong side.
I mean, we're trying to get there. I mean, we're not perfect, but it's exactly what we're trying to do with all our cross correlations, that showing how much is close and core and valuable compared to what is optional and what you say. I mean, in the end, to me, it doesn't matter how much is essential in the portfolio. You need just, one bullet kills. You need one essential patent, then you have your case, and everything else is how valuable is your portfolio, right? Doesn't matter to me, at least. That's the thing, and assuming that Qualcomm has at least one essential patent for 5G, I think maybe we can, right? I mean, this is maybe even, we don't even need the claims right there.